Okay, so calculating the warp, we are going to make two placemats. So here's our first placemat, and here's our second placemat. And each of those placemats is going to be 18 inches of actual woven fabric. So that one's 18 inches, and this one's 18 inches. But I'm going to plan to have fringe. I don't know if I want fringe, but I always plan to have fringe. And my fringe is always quite long, so I'm having 2.5 inches for fringe, and that way I'll have plenty of room if I want to braid or twist or cut, or I don't cut straight. So 2.5 inches for fringe, and that's the total length of the woven project that we're doing. But we can't just use that as our calculation. We need to take those placemats, so there's 23 inches for each placemat. And so for two, it's going to be 46 inches of the actual woven project. But we need to calculate adding in all of the strings that's not on that woven project. So that 46 inches, that doesn't include what we call loom waste. Let's take a loom waste break.
So when I say we need to include 30 inches of waste or loom waste, I was always taught by Miss Skirty and Miss Patsy that it's always 30 inches. So I've always done 30 inches. I've seen people do 28 to 40 inches. You know, I guess it depends on your preference, but for our purposes of the classes, we're just going to do a straight 30 inches just because that's how I was trained. So that's what I do. So that's this stuff. And I'm curious to see if it's actually 30 inches of loom waste. So let's see, I've never really measured it before.
How about that? Miss Gertie was right. This is 13 inches. So 13 inches on both sides would be 26, so that's about 30, huh? Thank you for taking a loom waste break. So back to calculating the length. We're calculating the length of each piece right now. We have our 46 inches plus our loom waste. So if we remember, loom waste is always 30 inches across the board. So I'm going to take that 46 inches and I'm going to add 30 inches. But remember this fringe on the top and the bottom? I'm going to include that fringe in my loom waste. So I'm going to take the 46 inches and I'm actually going to add the 30 inches and I'm going to subtract those 5 inches, 2.5 and 2.5 is 5 inches. And so I'm going to have 46 inches plus 25 inches of loom waste. And then that's going to give me a total of 71 inches. So 71 inches is the length, but remember it's the length of every single string. So now that I have the length calculated, I have to take that 71 inches and I have to figure out how much yardage I'm going to need taking that 71 inches in individual strings across the width of my warp. So to do that, my width is 14 inches. That's the width of my placemat that I'm making. So to calculate how much yardage we need to take that 71 inches in length and figure out how much yardage we need total. Because we have to take each of those strings that are 71 inches across the width. So we're going to times it by the total number of ends going across the width of my placemat. Because each of those 71 inches of length goes across the placemat. How many times? We don't know. That's what we're going to figure out. Okay, so to do that, we take our 14 inches, because that's how wide we're weaving, and our reed that we're using is 12 ends per inch. So we're going to take those 14 inches and times it by the 12 ends per inch. And that's going to give us the total number of ends across the width. And it's 168. So I have 168 ends. So I'm going to take that 168 71 times. So I'm going to take my 71 inches, because that's the length of each string, and times it by 168, because that's how many times I'm going to take 71 inches, because each string is 71 and there's 168 strings. So 71 times 168 equals 11,928. But that's 11,928 inches. I'm not going to go into the yarn store and ask for 11,928 inches of anything. So I have to take that 11,928 and I'm going to divide it by 36, because 36 is how many inches are in a yard. And you buy things by the yard. So I have to figure out how many yards are in 11,928 inches. And I do that by dividing it by 36. And that equals, I already did it on the calculator for you, 331 yards. That's how many yards of string or yarn that we need for the warp of our 2 placemats. So I'm going to go over that one more time. My placemat is 18 inches of woven fabric. I have 2.5 inches of fringe on both placemats. So that's 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 inches for each placemat. 46 inches for 2 placemats. So I have the 46 plus the loom waist. Now my loom waist is 25, because usually loom waist is 30, but I subtracted this fringe, the 2.5 here and the 2.5 here. That's part of my loom waist, because this is going to be the front of my loom and this is going to be the back of my loom. So 30 minus 5 equals 25 inches of loom waist. That's 71 inches in length that this project's going to be. So that's for the length. So I take that 71 and then I have to times it by the total number of ends that are going to go across this 14 inches. So I have 14 inches and my reed is 12 ends per inch. So that's 168 ends total. 168 ends total. So I take that 71 inches and I times it by 168, because I'm taking that 71 168 times. And that leaves me with 11,928 inches. But I need to convert that to yards. So I divide it by 36, because that's the inches in a yard. And I get 331 yards for the warp. That's how I calculate the warp. For those of you who don't want to write down the drawn out calculations, there are other options. So here is the Shirat's website, which is a great weaving website to peruse for any weaver. But they also have this great warp and weft calculator if you don't want to draw it out and work it out as we just did. The finished length, you just plug in your numbers. The finished length of our fabric, if you remember, is 46. And I got that 46 because I had my 2.5 inches of fringe plus my 18 inches of woven placemat plus the 2.5 inches of fringe. So this is one placemat. Oops, that's 2.5. This is one placemat, but I need to add the other placemat as well. So I have that 2.5 inches of fringe plus the 18 inches of woven placemat plus 2.5 inches of fringe. And so that is how I got this 46. I just wanted to make sure everybody was understanding how I got that. So fringe, we don't have anything because it's included in that 46. So shrinkage and take up. I never calculate for shrinkage and take up because I never had a need to. Now, take up, they say, is 10%. I've never had need for take up, but take up is when you're weaving and those threads are going over and under and over and under and over and under. That takes up a little bit more yardage with the thread than if the thread were laying completely flat. But I never have had 10% take up in my weavings, and I don't calculate for it. So if master weavers probably do, but I never account for it. So extra length for sampling. We're not sampling. Sampling is when you are choosing to weave a couple of inches of different patterns or weave a couple of inches with different threads and yarns to see how it looks. So we're not doing any sampling. Loom waist. Now loom waist is usually 30, but our loom waist is actually going to be 25 because if you remember, we have that 30 inches and we are subtracting 5 inches. Oops, we're subtracting 5 inches. So this 5 inches, if you remember, is the fringe over here. That's included in this 46. So our loom waist is actually 25 inches. The total length of our warp is 71, or about 2 yards, almost 2 yards. Now our warp width, the finished width of our placemat is going to be 14 inches. Okay. Now the draw in, we're going to try and have not, we're going to try and not have any draw in. Draw in is when you're weaving, if you pull your weave too tight, the edges of your weave will bow in because you'll be pulling it too tight. So we don't want to have any draw in. Again, shrinkage, I don't worry about that. Total width of the warp is 14 inches. We know that. We know that's going to be our finished project. We are going to have 12 ends per inch going along the width, and because we want a balanced weave. So the total number of ends is 168. So for our warp, we have 330.96 yards. So 331 yards is the materials we need for the warp. Now for our weft. The weft are the strings going across. So the total width of the warp is 14. Again, we aren't going to be worrying about take up. The length of one weft, shot, or pick is going to be 14 because that's the total width. And we're going to have a balanced weave, so we're having 12 picks per inch. So a balanced weave is when your warp and weft are balanced and they are the same. So weft needed for 1 inch of weaving is 168. and the total length of the warp is 71. So the total weft that we're going to need in yards is 331.33. The total yardage for the two placemats would be 662.29. It's pretty close to what we calculated, but it's just another option. They also have a printable worksheet here if you'd rather keep your records this way. And it has the exact same information: the finished lake, the fringe, the finished width, if you're going to calculate for the drawing, or the shrinkage, which I never do, total width, ends per inch. It has the exact same information. But this is just another option to calculate the warp and weft if you do not want to write it down like I did. Next up, measuring out our yarn. I hope you enjoyed learning how to calculate the warp and weft for a weaving project. If you'd like more information about me, visit my Patreon page at patreon.com, warped a work in progress, or you can visit my website at warpedaworkinprogress.com. Thanks for joining me, and I look forward to us weaving some stuff.